Well, now that the NFL draft is over, the NFL offseason can actually begin. And as we all know, there really is no offseason. This draft was fascinating. There were storylines all around it. The Bengals had a draft that most people think was okay, some people think was horrible, and others think was fantastic. We'll talk about all those things and the story of the draft, Shedeur Sanders. Let's get started. Hi, hello, and welcome in to episode number 135 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. My name is Austin Elmore. We will dive deep into the Bengals draft class in just a couple of minutes, but before we do, I want to start with the story that everybody seems to be talking about, which is the story of Shedeur Sanders. So, Shedeur Sanders, the son of Deion Sanders, the quarterback at the University of Colorado, previously at Jackson State with Dion back then. He is a draft prospect. He's a fine quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. He's not very athletic. He's got some issues to his game, as a lot of young quarterbacks do. And he was the story of the draft. If you've been living under a rock, the reason was he was projected to be a first and he did not get picked until the fifth round. He slid considerably. So people are asking, why is it that Shedeur Sanders slid so far? And there's all these different conspiracy theories and thoughts and whatever. Let's just get down to business. This is how it happened with Shedeur Sanders. Many people believe this to be one of the weakest draft classes in recent memory for quarterbacks. For example, Cam Ward went number one overall to the Tennessee Titans. He was the quarterback formerly at Washington State and then Miami in Florida. And he probably would have been the fifth or sixth ranked quarterback in last year's draft. He goes number one this year. So already you have a weak class of quarterbacks. You have a few teams up top that are quarterback needy. And you have a few interesting quarterbacks that could maybe be in that first or second round range. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, those type of players. And so if you start with the idea that there are not a ton of quarterback needy teams and not a ton of viable quarterback prospects, it already kind of shrinks the number of teams that might be willing to take Shedeur Sanders. And then if you take out the Tennessee Titans, who picked the quarterback number one, that shrinks it even more. So let's get into Shedeur. Shedeur Sanders played at Jackson State, a very small school, had some success, follows his dad to Colorado. And there, Shedeur is incredibly accurate. He leads all of college football in completion percentage and is really, really good. If he has one strength, it's his accuracy and specifically his accuracy under pressure. That's where his game is very good. When the pocket is collapsing and he's able to stand in there and deliver throws, he's incredibly accurate. However, there were people evaluating his game as the draft came up and said, his offensive line he developed a lot of bad habits, and 75% of the tape that you see on him from Colorado, you kind of have to throw out because the offensive line isn't doing their job. Then there's another sizable chunk of the tape that you have to throw out because it's just passes that are 5 yards or shorter, 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage or closer, which would explain some of the high completion percentage numbers, but you're not seeing him layer as many throws. You're not seeing him take as many deep shots down the field. The other thing is when he is taking those deep shots down the field, he's throwing the ball to the Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter, which was the number 2 overall pick in the draft to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So you look at all those three things and you say, okay, well, how much of this is really the doing of Shedeur Sanders? And how much of it is he's just getting the ball out quickly. When he does go deep, he's throwing it to the best player in the country. And how do we fix some of these bad habits that have developed? Some of those bad habits is taking bad sacks, drifting out of the pocket, inaccuracies when on the run, stuff like that. So when you just look at him as a quarterback prospect, there were legitimate concerns. But because of how bad the rest of the class of quarterbacks was, he was ranked among the top quarterbacks. That is an indictment, I think, on the other quarterbacks, partially. And also, it skews kind of the way that Shedeur Sanders is viewed because of the lack around him. So that is just that from a football standpoint. A solid prospect, has some stuff, but needs a lot of work, is not ready to come in and start day one for your franchise and change things around. In other words, he's not Joe Burrow. He's not Peyton Manning. He's not all these quarterbacks we've seen come in early in the draft and immediately start and immediately change the culture around a team. He's not that. Okay. So that's just from a football perspective. From an everything outside of football perspective, Shedeur Sanders is a very popular person, very popular man in pop culture. His dad is one of the most famous athletes of all time, and without question, is constantly using his platform to talk about other people, about football, about his son, about topics, anything. And there is a relatively large entourage of people around them that are creating content and pushing pushing the brand, the Prime brand and the Sanders brand. And there's a lot of attention that comes with that. And so if you just look, for example, at the Shedeur Sanders draft party that was happening in Texas, there were it was a huge party at this huge house with his like moniker, which is legendary, with a dollar sign. And it was just very over the top. And I think if there was a way to describe the Sanders family, it would be over the top. And if you've paid any attention to Prime, or if you've paid any attention to Shedeur, you know that they're a very cocky and very arrogant family, a family that puts themselves first, a family that believes they're better than everyone else, a family that repeatedly shows you that with their actions and the way that they act, the way that they talk, the way that they treat people. There are horrible stories that have come out about the way Dion has treated people, specifically players at the University of Colorado. There are multiple rumors out there that Shedeur Sanders was a really bad teammate at Colorado. He's even tweeted publicly about a player being mid that left his team. There are a lot of reports out there about Dion and others bullying players on the way out the door at Colorado. Now, you cannot ignore the fact that Dion has brought more success to Colorado than they have seen in a long time. And Shedeur was a part of that. That is, you can't ignore that whatsoever. And so when you look at all the attention around them and the attitude and the arrogance and the cockiness that doesn't quite match up to the player on the field, that's kind of a nasty concoction. Now, the difference between Dion and Shedeur is that Dion was one of the greatest that's ever lived. He was cocky and arrogant throughout his draft process, but he backed it up. He has a gold jacket. He's enshrined forever in Canton, Ohio, in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Shedeur hasn't been able to back up his words over the course of his career nearly as much. Now, does he talk as much as Dion? No, he doesn't. But he wasn't able to back it up as much on the field. And so you go into the NFL Combine, and Shedeur starts meeting with teams. And again, he's under the belief that he is the best quarterback in the draft and that any team that gets him would be lucky to have him because of the people around him and his dad and the media attention all telling him how great he is and him believing it and saying how great he is as well. So he gets into the combine and starts meeting with a few of these teams that might be interested with him. And he comes off as brash, comes off as arrogant, comes off as selfish. There was a meeting that he had with the team. This was after the combine, I think, leading up to the process, where they had given him an install playbook, which is kind of the basics of how we are going to run the offense and the formation and this and all that basic stuff. And the team intentionally put errors in this playbook. So obvious errors that a quarterback would find and point out and correct and go over for their next meeting. So they get to their next meeting. Shedeur does not appear to have looked at this playbook, nor does he understand the errors, and that turns a team off. On top of that, he'd already kind of been arrogant and cocky and disinterested or distant in some of the meetings he'd had with teams similar to this at the combine. So when you already have a small pool of players or of teams that might be interested in you, and then you don't treat them well or don't have good meetings with them, and your workouts are okay but not great, and you're still athletically not testing at an elite level, you continue to shrink the pool over and over and over again. And then back to the football side of things, if you're seen as a quarterback that's maybe not ready to come in and start day one, you're viewed as a backup quarterback. And why does a team, or why would a team want a backup quarterback with this much noise? Now, make no mistake, Shedeur Sanders and his popularity is a product of sports media and the constant pushing of narratives or players or people, and not talking enough about the game and explaining how football works, and more or less talking about, is this person better than that person, or is this greatness better than that greatness, and how do you rank this, and how this nonsensical stuff that really doesn't teach anybody anything makes him out to be a player that he's not. And on top of that, I believe Shedeur Sanders was 14-13 in his career as a starter at Colorado. He had his number retired. That in and of itself is unbelievably arrogant and selfish and stupid and a bad look. Deion Sanders at the Super Bowl was talking with media and talking about how he doesn't want his son to go to certain teams. And he's already told certain teams, don't draft my son, because he's basically saying too good for your organization. You see where this is all leading? That these people thought they were so good and seen as so good across the league that they could essentially kind of pick their own landing spot, do whatever they wanted to do, and it would all work out because they're the best in the world. Well, they weren't. And then, so back to this other thing, if you're not that and you're going to be a backup quarterback, why would a team want all that noise, the national media noise, the social media noise, the entourage that you bring with you, Deion Sanders spouting off on social media, and every time he gets behind a microphone about you, being micromanaged in a lot of different ways? Who wants that for a backup quarterback? Anybody? Anybody interested in that? No. We've seen this in the past. We've seen it with Tim Tebow. We've seen it with Cam Newton. We've seen it with Colin Kaepernick. Guys in which the noise that would surround them did not outweigh their play on the field or their role on the team. And because of that, teams weren't interested. Teams wanted nothing to do with it. And that, I think, is what you saw with Shedeur Sanders. I also do not believe that the Cleveland Browns wanted to draft him. I think that was a Jimmy Haslam decision. Jimmy Haslam, if you know anything about him, he's a fool. He's amazing he's not in jail. He's made unbelievably boneheaded football decisions over and over again over the course of his career. This, to me, felt like a Jimmy Haslam decision because the Browns had already drafted the quarterback that they thought was better in Dylan Gabriel, and then they drafted another one in Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round. And if you know anything about Cleveland, not good for quarterbacks. But I will give Shedeur Sanders some credit because he said in the conference call with the Cleveland media that there was some things he had done that he thought were right at the time that he realizes now maybe weren't right and were wrong and he needs to fix. That sort of humility, that sort of attitude can help Shedeur Sanders go a long way. I hope this lesson that was learned, this humble pie that was served, is a good thing for him and a good thing for his family. But as far as the prank call is concerned, I don't feel bad for him about him losing out on a bunch of money. I don't feel bad for him about him sliding and being the story of the draft and embarrassed. I don't feel bad for him because he has bullied and embarrassed and mocked other people several times over the last several years, and he deserved every ounce of what he got. Also, players are prank called all the time during the NFL draft. All the time. You know what? Let's talk about that for a second. So, this was the other story that the son of former New York Jets interim head coach and defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich, his son Jax, apparently accessed the contact list for NFL players or players entering the NFL draft through his dad, Jeff's iPad. Jeff, now the defensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons, saved some of the numbers to prank call players during the draft. Most notably, Deion Sanders' son, Shedeur. I believe it also happened to Tyler Warren. It happened a year ago to Cooper DeJean. The only thing we know for sure is that Jax Ulbrich did this, him and his friends did this to Shedeur Sanders. Mean? Yes. Do I feel bad about it? No. Happens all the time. And a video happens to come out of them doing this. And number one, if you're going to do that, why record it? Why put it out there? They're going to find you, especially if you're connected to the NFL through your dad. How stupid is that? Unbelievable. But yeah, happens all the time. Okay, let me take a drink of coffee, see if we can reset here. What about the Cincinnati Bengals? Okay, so the Bengals go mostly how we expected them to go in the draft, which was defense. There were, however, some surprising picks. So here's what I know for sure. The Bengals entered the night, they were trying to address their defensive line. And Shamar Stewart was one of the top players on their board. As they got closer to 17, other players ahead of him were taken. And so at 17, the Bengals felt like they could trade back and still be able to land one of the top players on their board, including but not limited to Shamar Stewart. And the Bengals were feverishly trying to trade back in the first round, according to a couple people that I talked to, but they couldn't find any suitors. So they stayed put and they took Shamar Stewart. Now, people consider this a bit of a reach. People consider him a bit of a project. He's come from Texas A&M. He's an elite athlete. He's a freak athlete. He's got all the tools, size, speed, athleticism, rusher. But the one thing he doesn't have is production. Just 4.5 sacks over his college career. However, he has led Texas A&M in pressures over the last couple of seasons, including, I think, 39 pressures a year ago for the Aggies. So that's good. But overall, the biggest concern is he's a really young player who, over the course of his college career, never figured out how to finish and be productive at sacking the quarterback. And so the Bengals are essentially banking on the fact that he's young and he can develop, and they've got a new defensive coordinator and a new defensive line coach, Jerry Montgomery. They can build him and develop him into the player they need to be an elite pass rusher. The other thing is, because of his size, 6'6", 270, right around those 6'5", 270, right around that number, they also feel like he can be dynamic in the multiple packages that they use him, including bumping him to the inside to get some pass rush from the inside. So if you just look at it on paper, Joseph Osai played really well the last few games of last season, had, I think, 4 sacks on the season. Myles Murphy is going to get every opportunity, and they're going to try to do the same thing developing him. And Trey Hendrickson is still incredibly good at rushing the passer. So if you have those three guys and you pair them with Shamar Stewart, you now have an ability to a chance to develop some really good pass rushers, and you are considerably better. And more than anything, chaos. That's what Al Golden is looking for, the new defensive coordinator. One of his acronyms is BEST, B-E-S-T, and he talks about the B stands for ball disruption. Shamar Sanders, I just combined them. Shamar Stewart can do that. He can be disruptive. He can cause chaos. He can create pressures, and he can make life easier on those other defensive tackles, or the defensive tackles and the defensive ends. The Bengals see this as these guys working together will make each one of them better and will be difficult for an offensive line. That's where that comes back to. So I like the Shamar Stewart pick. He was very impressive in his interviews. I had a chance to speak with him briefly and just told him congratulations, stuff like that. But he doesn't say much. He doesn't talk very much, which I kind of like. He seems like a dude who genuinely loves football, and that's just the most important thing in his life, and he's trying to get better at that. I posted a video on my social media of his first interaction with Joe Burrow. and it's hilarious. Almost up to 1 million views. So if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. Joe walking through the locker room, meets Shamar, gives him a hug, tells him welcome aboard, and then as he's walking away, is just like, let's get some sacks. Joe does not care. Man. Get the damn sacks and let's keep it moving. So, um, I'm not one to give out draft grades. I don't know. I don't know how these players are going to translate. I don't know exactly how they're going to, adjust to life in the NFL. I don't know how the teams are going to use them. It's hard to say. And anytime you give out draft grades, you can't do it until a couple of years later. So that being said, I'm not going to be giving out draft grades, but I think it's a solid pick. Maybe not the most exciting pick, especially when you consider Jihad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama, was still on the board, and he went 16 picks later, 15 picks later to the Philadelphia Eagles, which makes the Bengals' second-round pick even more intriguing. I think going into this draft, the idea was there's a lot of really good edge rushers. There's a few good linebackers, but the drop-off on linebackers happens very quickly in terms of there's a few really good ones, and then the talent pool drops considerably. So fast forward to the second round, the Bengals are trying to get a linebacker. Jermaine Pratt has requested a trade. He stinks anyways. They're moving on from him without Golden. And so they hone in on Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. Has played for a couple of different schools over the course of his college career. He's a little bit older, 24 years old right now, going to be 25 when the season starts. He's married. He has 2 kids. He's got a really interesting story and trying to provide for his family. Team leader, captain, good guy, everything you want out of a linebacker, more of a run stopper. Not great man-to-man coverage, can kind of get lost on an island, but decent in zone. He's athletic. He's better than Jermaine Pratt. He was actually compared to Pratt a lot early on. Listen, if you rewind the tape to Jermaine Pratt from 2-3 years ago before he got his big deal, that's a hungry linebacker, a productive linebacker, a good linebacker. Things have changed over the last couple of years. You get older in the NFL, you deal with injuries, you get money, life changes. If Demetrius Knight Jr., who, by the way, has a great nickname of the Dark Knight, if he can produce at that Jermaine Pratt level early on from a couple of years ago, I think you'd be thrilled with that. But I think the biggest criticism of this is he probably would have been available in round 3. And on the board at the time was Tate Ratledge, the guard out of Georgia, which was a hot topic, a big name that a lot of Bengals fans really wanted. Tate Ratledge. He's got experience with the Marius Mims at the University of Georgia, size, speed, athleticism, and guard maybe the biggest need on the team. The Bengals passed on him. We'll get to that in a little bit as to why. But if you look at what the Bengals did, they drafted Demetrius Knight in the second round. They drafted Barrett Carter in the 4th round, 2 linebackers. So clearly, and they signed a linebacker in free agency, which tells you they clearly view linebacker as an important part of their defense. Why not at that point draft Jihad Campbell at 17, linebacker out of Alabama? And maybe that was their plan. Maybe it was, hey, we're going to trade back a few picks and we'll take Jihad Campbell at 22 and see how that goes. But it didn't work out that way. And they probably looked at the value of an edge rusher in Shamar Stewart and the intangibles and tools that he brings and said, we can't pass on him at 17. We want Jihad Campbell, but not at 17. We're going to go with Shamar Stewart. I get why they did it, but it did influence the rest of their draft. So because they miss out on Campbell in round 1, they go linebacker in round 2 in Demetrius Knight, which a lot of people feel like was a reach. So now you've kind of pigeonholed yourself into having to draft a position of need in round 3. And what they do is they draft Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. Now, Dylan Fairchild, maybe a smidge undersized, but really strong, really stout, and had one of the best pass blocking grades of any offensive lineman in college football last year, specifically in the SEC, as a left guard for Georgia. He's also very familiar with the strike system, which is the way that offensive linemen use their hands in fending off edge rushers, pass rushers, defensive tackles, and so on. And that system was developed by Scott Peters, the Bengals' new offensive line coach. So there's familiarity in what Peters is going to teach There is good tape of him producing at a high level conference in the SEC. There's some experience with Amarius Mims, who's going to be playing right tackle for the Bengals. And there was availability for them in round 3 with Dylan Fairchild. He is going to come in right away and have a chance to start at left guard for the Bengals. So you look at 3 guys: Stewart, Knight, Fairchild. First 3 picks, all 3 of those guys are probably going to start. So when you look at value, that to me is valuable. You've addressed 3 needs. You're going to get production out of them. They're probably going to start. Okay, I can live with that. Here's where things got a little bit interesting for me, though, in the fourth round. They drafted Barrett Carter, a linebacker out of Clemson. They passed on Jack Sawyer. I know I'm a bit of an Ohio State homer. I believe Jack Sawyer can take the path of Trey Hendrickson, which is maybe not productive right away, but after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years, can be a really good pass rusher once he figures out life in the NFL. He gets some teaching, figures out his body, and so on. I feel like he could be similar to Trey, and that's not just because they're both white pass rushers. I find them similar. So I was upset that the Bengals passed on Jack Sawyer in the 4th round for another linebacker when they'd already signed one and drafted one. And I was especially upset that Jack Sawyer goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they will inevitably get the best out of him, and he will be a menace for the Bengals, to the Bengals for the next 15 years. That is miserable. But they draft Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. This dude has legit sideline to sideline speed, incredible athleticism. That's been the theme of both those linebackers: speed, speed, speed. Clearly, Al Golden values speed at that position. So it's interesting is they kind of took 2 linebackers that are very similar in the molds of the 2 guys that they've been playing with the last couple of years. Barrett Carter is a younger, kind of in the mold of Logan Wilson. Demetrius Knight is in the mold of Jermaine Pratt. Obviously, that's worked for the Bengals. If they can get production like that, that will be critical for their success. I like the pick of Barrett Carter, especially in the 4th round. It makes a little bit more sense. Looking at the players around him, maybe there were some guys I'd rather have, but I can see the vision, and I'm starting to see the vision a little bit for the Bengals and with Al Golden. Then they draft another offensive lineman, a guard/tackle in Jalen Rivers. Ginormous man, 319-pounder out of Miami, Florida. And a dude that has a little bit of experience with last year's 7th-round pick, Matt Lee, who's going to be the backup center this year. Jalen Rivers, most people think, is a guard in the National Football League. He does have some experience at tackle. The Bengals need a swing tackle. I think Jalen Rivers is kind of the guy that they're thinking of in that regard. He's the guy that I think has a chance to surprise people. 319 pounds. When he was a sophomore in high school, he weighed 357 pounds. He was able to cut down to 319, has been around 319, 320 ever since. He's athletic. He's smart. He knows football really, really well, comes from a military background in his family. And so because of that, I look at it and I look at his experience at guard and I think, man, if it's truly a competition for both guard spots, I think there's a chance Jalen Rivers will challenge Lucas Patrick. I think he'll challenge Cordell Volson. I think it's going to be interesting between Cody Ford and Dylan Fairchild. If he gets a fair shot, I wouldn't be surprised if he could win one of those guard spots in Jalen Rivers. And then their 6th-round pick was Taj Brooks, running back out of Texas Tech. This dude's a workhorse, 4th most rushing yards all time in the Big 12, and he's behind some good guys, some good players, guys like Cedric Benson, Ricky Williams, Darren Sproles, guys like that, pretty good. Couple of 1,500-yard rushing seasons for Taj Brooks. He is in the mold of a Samaje Perine, and I think the Bengals, number one, he's going to make the team, without a doubt. You need somebody back there to accent Chase Brown a little bit. And last week, the Bengals came to a contract agreement with Zach Moss to kind of rework his deal. He's coming off of a serious neck injury, so his future is a little bit uncertain. They signed and brought back Samaje Perine. He's probably going to be primarily a special teamer, but a depth piece. And Taj Brooks is probably going to slide right in as the number 2 running back on this roster, but he needs to be attached at the hip to Samaje Perine as a guy who understands football, understands the Bengals system, how they operate, and is a great pass blocker as a running back, a willing and able pass blocker, and also can give you something in the run game outside of just Chase Brown. that is critical for the team. And so for that reason, I really like that pick as well. So they don't trade any of the picks. I was shocked by that. I know they were trying to, but they didn't trade any of the picks. So they get just 6 picks, which in and of itself, I think is a bit of a failure. You needed more picks. You would like to have some more guys. However, they did pick up a couple of good undrafted free agents, including Seth McLaughlin from Ohio State, the former center. He's dealing with an Achilles injury, supposed to be cleared by July. We'll see. A future potential replacement to Ted Karras. I like that pickup. Also like the pickup of Jordan Moore, the wide receiver out of Duke. There's an opportunity there. I think it'll be interesting to see how those guys play out. A couple of defensive tackles they picked up as well, including Howard Cross from Notre Dame. It's probably the thinnest position on the roster right now. Probably need at least one more of those between now and the start of the season. But they did not pick up any defensive backs, which I found interesting. They feel very confident and are looking forward to giving those guys a lot of reps in spring. So I think I'm not drinking the Bengals Kool-Aid. I'm not telling you the best drafters in the world. They have a long track record of failure, and so I don't have high expectations. I'm also not one of those people that's going to give you a draft grade. I'm not going to do that. Nobody knows. I'm not going to pretend like I know. I know of these people because I've read them and studied them in preparation for this draft. I don't know exactly how the Bengals plan to use them, and until we get more indication of that, it's unfair to assess a grade. I know grades get a lot of clicks, and they bring a lot of I'm just not going to do that. Now, how do I feel about it? Okay, fine, sure. If you want to translate that into a letter grade, go ahead. Maybe it's a C. I don't know. That's how I feel. To me, the biggest thing this draft said is the Bengals said that we believe we can get more out of the interior pass rush by using the bodies that we currently have. And that if we are just marginally better on defense, we're better against the run, which they are, and we can be better against the pass just slightly and get 1, 2, maybe 3 more stops a game, our offense is good enough to win. The Bengals have multiple times this offseason brought up Tanner Hudson fumbling in week 1 going into the end zone against the Patriots, the bad call against the Baltimore Ravens on the 2-point conversion, the drop snap against Baltimore on the kick that could have won the game. You look at those 3 plays in a season full of plays like that, and that's what kept the Bengals out of the playoffs. They were dangerous at the end, winning those last 5. I think the Bengals look at that and they say, okay, we're going to blame a lot of this on coaching. We're going to blame a lot of this on Lou Anarumo. We're going to bring in a guy who can get the most out of our young players and develop them and turn our defense into a strength. Maybe not the strength of the team because the offense is still there. But if we can give Joe Burrow 3 more possessions a game, we will turn teams into pass-only catch-up mode, and then we'll use the pass rushers we have to get after the quarterback. That, to me, is what this draft and so far this entire offseason signifies for the Bengals. So that's what I think about that as far as, in as Forrest Gump would say. Is what I'm trying to say. All right, that does it for me. Thank you so much for listening. Pass the podcast along to a friend. Give it a rating if you can. Subscribe, follow, post about it, tweet about it. Tell your Facebook friends. Tell your mom to listen. She might like it. I don't know. Maybe your dad will too. If you liked what you heard, you can follow me on everything at Auty Elmore, AUTYELMORE. It's not spelled AUDDIE like some people like to spell it. AUTYELMORE. You can also hear me weekdays, noon to 3 on Cincy 360 with Tony Pike. You can listen anywhere live on the iHeartRadio app. You can also listen to this podcast on the iHeartRadio app and listen on ESPN 1530. Thank you so much for listening. Back again next week as we dive deep into the waters of the NFL offseason. This has been episode number 135 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. And as always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.